Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Ari, and today we're going to have some more stories about our toxic life. But before we start, it would be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to my channel, like the video, if you enjoy it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now without further ado, let's go. Today's first story. In this story, after supporting his wife through her veterinary education, Opie devastated to discover her affair with her employer. Confronted with evidence from a coworker, he exposes the affair online, leading to the closure of the vet's practice. Despite his wife's pleas for forgiveness, he refuses to reconcile, eventually finding solace in the loyalty of the coworker who helped uncover the betrayal. Through the ordeal, he learns to let go of his former love and embrace the possibility of trusting others. Now let's get into the story. My wife and I were married for 13 years, and during that time I supported her as she started attending school to become a veterinarian. Before she graduated, she started working for an experienced vet with his own practice. We were very much in love, and she thanked me often for supporting her during this time so she'd be able to follow her dream of becoming a vet and owning her own practice, meaning that hopefully she could take over the one she was working at. Now, when the man she works for retires, he mentioned that he was looking for someone to fill his role, and my wife believed he was referring to her. He was, but I don't think she anticipated what he was going to ask of her in return. I certainly didn't anticipate her betrayal. She came home late one day feeling quite happy and energetic. I expected her to be exhausted because that's how she usually felt after an extra long day. Her coming home late usually meant she had to deal with unexpected animals being brought in. Sometimes she witnessed death, and on those days she usually went to bed without eating. I felt bad, but she did choose the career, so it was something she'd have to cope with anyway. On this night, she was not sad or exhausted. Quite the opposite. I asked what happened today, and the smile fell from her face immediately. She looked shocked that I was asking such a normal question. She said nothing unusual and asked why I asked. I laughed nervously and said I usually asked her that when she got home, but she was also very happy a second ago, so that's why I was asking. Her face softened, but she didn't know what to say. She finally came up with a fake reason for her bouncy attitude, saying it was the receptionist's birthday. So they played music, ate cake, and acted silly. It was refreshing. After a long day, this totally made sense to me and take me for a fool. I believed her. Everything returned to normal for a few days, except she was happier than normal. Who knew the receptionist's birthday would have such a lasting effect on her? She came home on Friday night late and said life always has a way of working out for the better. She's so thankful to be pursuing her dream and working in this career. I was hesitant to say I loved doing it for her because I just felt like something was wrong. I decided to bring her flowers and a restaurant lunch to work the next day, and that's the day everything changed. The receptionist's name is Blair. When I walked in holding flowers and food, she said she hoped I was the Prince Charming she'd been waiting for. She was flirty and pretty, but I told her I was a married man looking for my wife. When said her name, she looked me in the eye with a very upset expression. She didn't know what to say or do. She just stared at me. I asked if she was okay and if she could go get her for me. She finally stood up, looked into the hallway, and whispered for me to come with her outside. I was extremely confused, but I went along with it. We stood by her car, and she told me something I just couldn't believe. She said the other night she was slower to leave than usual and already said goodbye to Mr. Vet and my wife. They were the last two in the building besides her. As she put on her coat, she was looking at the security cameras and saw them doing things in a back room with the door shut, probably not realizing that she was still in the building. My vision started spinning when she told me this, but I snapped myself out of it because my wife was good. She was always so kind and honest and grateful. That's what I was thinking. I asked Blair when her birthday was and she said October 20th. It was July, so I knew my wife lied about that, but I still couldn't believe she was cheating on me. I told Blair that I needed her help in exchange for the roses and lunch. I just needed her to stay a little late again each night until she caught them again, so she could record the screen with her phone and send it to me. I wrote my number on the little card that came with the roses. Maybe I was flirting a little, but that's for fate to decide. She agreed while she worked. She was uncomfortable knowing now that my wife was married and doing what she was doing when she first caught them. She assumed the woman was single and wrote it off as none of her concern. She had to fake being nice to avoid suspicion. She didn't have to wait long for them to do it again. She recorded it and sent it to me. It was hard for me to watch. It was my wife's face and they were doing it. That's all I needed to see. I posted it on the internet, naming her the vet in the business name, effectively informing everyone in the town and anyone they knew. My wife was the quickest to react, but she got home and greeted me before knowing what I'd done. I'd asked her if she looked at her phone lately, and that's all it took. She hadn't checked it since she cheated on me just hours before. She gasped, covered her mouth, and I could tell her heart started pounding. She was shaking and her breathing was uneven. She threw her phone at me. In her frustration, she dropped to the floor, and the first thing she said was that AP was going to lose his business. I said, "Well, that's too bad." And my wife charged at me like she became a monster. She blamed me for it, but I said she was crazy. I told her to get out, and she was so hurt by me for some reason that she only grabbed a few things and left. She tried telling her family any number of stories in ways that portrayed her as the victim. They didn't believe anything she said. They saw the video and lost all faith in her. They told her she basically risked her career and marriage for nothing. She didn't have to do it, but she did. And this is what happens to people when they don't act with respect. I know all this because it was in the comments of my post. AP lost a bunch of his patient's owners. No one trusted him to behave responsibly, and husbands didn't want their wives or daughters bringing their pets there. His business took a huge hit. Without being able to pay employees, he closed his business. My wife begged me to forgive her after she accepted that her whole family hated her for sleeping with AP. When we first got married, her family was super proud of her for catching me. I refused to allow her to come back into my life because after all those years of supporting her and committing myself to her, she betrayed me for someone else. I would have been a fool to help her. She ended up moving back in with her family. She wasn't working at the time because of AP closing his practice, so she had to quickly find a job. She was absolutely miserable because AP wanted nothing to do with her. He considered her bad luck and felt sick to his stomach whenever he looked at her. He let himself mix pleasure with business, and it destroyed both. She actually told him she was married, but he swore I'd never find out. Once he retired, he promised she could have the business and he'd leave her alone. But I doubt that was going to happen. My wife told me all this in the hopes it would encourage me to forgive her. It didn't help, but it was nice to know the reasoning behind it. I haven't heard from her in a long time now and have been thinking about asking out Blair. She got a new job pretty fast and has remained on my side and loyal since all of this started. She gives me hope, and overall, I've learned that it's possible to let go of someone you once loved and trusted because unfair and unpredictable things happen in life. There are other trustworthy people out there. Today's second story. In this story, Opie's relationship with his wife takes a dark turn when he suspects her of infidelity with their church pastor. His suspicions are confirmed when he catches them in the act at the church. The situation escalates, leading to a public confrontation during a church service, ultimately resulting in the pastor's downfall and the dissolution of the church community. Now let's get into the story. My wife and I were married for 6 years when we started going to a new church. It took us a while to find one we didn't feel uncomfortable at. After the first service, the pastor gave us each contact card to fill out, and as I watched my wife interact with him, I felt like I was watching two people instantly become fascinated with each other. Even though I was standing there and the pastor mentioned his wife, they still seemed enthralled by the other. I finally broke up the conversation by reminding my wife I had to get home to watch the Eagles play. During the game, I noticed her texting someone a lot. That was the first sign. That night, I finally asked who she was messaging, and she said it was a woman from church that she exchanged numbers with while I was getting coffee. I did remember her talking to a woman while I poured myself coffee, so I believed her lie. But that night, she wasn't very eager to have sex, and her phone kept buzzing as we did it. The next few days, there was no sex or phone buzzing. I glanced at her screen and noticed a little moon symbol in the corner, so I knew she put her phone on silent. I saw a text from a woman's name, but it didn't make sense. And at the time, I didn't think she was doing anything more than texting a new friend too much. Well, she refused to talk about why she didn't want to have sex anymore, and I didn't face her one bit. She was always holding her phone, even as she made dinner or laid in bed. She started picking fights with me when I'd ask her to put the phone down, which seemed to give her more of a reason to ignore me and stay on her phone, since, according to her, we weren't getting along anymore. She told me she was signing up for a night class at the church on Thursday. This was when we hadn't done anything together for a month and a half, so I was angry and irritable. I asked if I could go with her, and she said it was a women's only thing. I started to wonder if she was starting an affair with a woman, but I did remember her interaction with the pastor. On the same day, her phone started buzzing, so I followed her on the first night I knew her going anywhere without me. After all, our abstinence was a really bad sign. She actually drove to the church, so I drove past the entrance feeling a little delusional. But when I turned around and drove by again, I noticed there were only 2 cars in the parking lot. I entered the parking lot and parked far away. I didn't know what was going on, but I was about to find out. The side door where the cars were parked was unlocked. I went inside, and all I had to do was follow the sounds. I started recording with my phone and shaky hands. My heart was going crazy because I knew my wife was here, and I was hearing sounds I'd never hear in a church ever again. I came to a closed door, but all I had to do was open it, and I saw them on a mattress on the floor. I recorded them frantically getting dressed while I yelled at them, calling them names and demanding they explain themselves. But I didn't really give them a chance to talk because I didn't want to hear what they had to say. I couldn't stay a moment longer, so I ran out of the church as my wife called after me. I drove home and locked my wife out of the house with additional locks. I sat wide awake in the dark living room, waiting to see if she'd try to come home. She did around 3 a.m. But when she realized she couldn't get in, she just got back in her car and left. I knew she couldn't stay at the pastor's house since he was married, but she would probably sleep in the church. I pictured the pastor freaking out over the very real possibility of him losing his entire livelihood and family. Just then he tried to call me. Of course, I wouldn't answer it, but he left me a very interesting voicemail, and he said if I would consider keeping his name out of this situation, he would make it worth my while. I couldn't believe he was offering me a bride. What a good example this man was. I had proof. I lied and told him I would keep his name out of it if he let me address the congregation to tell them about my wife's infidelity. I wanted to make sure she would never set foot in that church again. He agreed happily. That Sunday, as far as I know, my wife had been sleeping on the affair mattress in the church for 2 nights. She tried calling and texting me, but we didn't see each other until Sunday morning, when she was wearing the same clothes as Thursday and didn't appear to be enjoying herself. She looked nervous and sick when I refused to sit with her or talk, and when I was called up by the pastor to speak, I thought she would pass out. The pastor was sweating, but he had no choice. Either I was going to destroy his life or take his bride. He had to trust me, and just like he broke my trust, I was going to break his. I got right to the point and said I had proof my wife was having an affair with the pastor of this church. The collective gasp was so intense my hair moved. The pastor didn't know what to do. He just froze in place, dripping sweat. People looked to him for an answer or objection, but he knew I recorded it, so he would be a fool to deny it. He excused himself as the congregation got louder, including the vocal objections and cries from his wife. She wailed as I left past my soon-to-be ex and out the front door of the church. Before I got far, I heard her yell at my wife, amongst other commotions. Neither of us went to that church again. Actually, no one did, because AP was divorced and lost all respect and credibility. The exposure and divorce went as well as it could for me, so I couldn't be happier. I've since started dating again and feel confident I'll find someone worthwhile. I've noticed my life happening in chapters, so when a change occurs, it doesn't take away my motivation to keep moving forward.